Folks, welcome to More Than a Refresh, the T3D sessions. Our guest today is Pauline, and she'd like to talk a little bit about open source investment, but a slightly different angle than what you hear about on the social webs. Pauline, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm Pauline and I work at MongoDB as a professional open source maintainer, basically. So I get paid to maintain open source.
Okay. And what is it? What's this different angle that the approach you want to take?
Yeah, so basically, through my own work and like what I see around me, I think something that people don't really talk about that much is that if you have a product and there is an open source ecosystem around your specific product, so let's say there's like an SDK or something that someone built to be able to communicate with your product, then it's super critical as a business to dedicate engineering resources to maintaining that ecosystem, basically.
So, give me an example of what you mean by that. What
So,
kind of product? You said SDK or API, fine, but who's the business? Who's the ecosystem?
well, I mean, the easiest, most straightforward example, of course, is where I work now. I do have another example that's a slightly different use case that I'll get back to just so that people can kind of see how it applies to them. Because obviously, like MongoDB is a database company, so that's like a
Sure.
very specific like tech product, right? So
Right.
it makes sense that there are SDKs and client libraries and things for our product. Um, so it's not super relatable to everyone. So I'll get back to that in a second. But for what we do, we have an entire department purely to maintain libraries, client libraries in each, big market share programming language and their respective
Sure.
ecosystems. Because
So,
yeah.
okay, yes, I'm very aware of MongoDB because it's a direct competitor to how I make my living, which is
I'm
with
sorry. Sorry to
PostgreSQL.
hear that. Right, right,
No,
right.
it's okay. It's okay. It's just I mean, I'm a Postgres guy,
Yep.
and I've also had Mark Porter, who may predate you at Mongo, on this podcast, and at the time, I don't remember if he was president, CEO, or CTO or something, but he is one of the C's on this podcast, the long form of it. The Mongo is an interesting case because Mongo used to be open source
Mm,
and it's not anymore. And it was open source with all those libraries, so Python, Ruby, C, so on and so forth. And when they didn't close source it, but when they made it not open source, they kept the libraries open source and continued to maintain them.
yeah.
Right? So it's a slightly different thing because Mongo, they made a business decision to try and lock out the world from their product, but continue to support their existing ecosystem through open source.
Yeah, so part of part of the product itself is still open source, but then there's also this like platform model now that's like really popular, right? Where, you have like an open source product, but you also offer like this cloud hosted yada yada to like so there's that. So it's like partially open source, but then also partially not, which like sparks the debate. And some people say that like that makes it completely not open source anymore. Some people are like, well, it's a little bit more nuanced and this and that. But yeah, what you
Well, I mean, the only people that think it's nuanced are people that want to change the definition of open source.
Yeah, 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 and,
Right,
like,
open source
a
is
lot of
a
stuff saying
very
that
clear definition and
yeah, yeah,
has since like 1999. So while I understand, especially marketing people who do nothing but destroy the world, want to change that. And look, I'm not bashing MongoDB. Please don't misunderstand. It's their business, it's their code. They can do what they want. More power to them. I hope they're successful in it. But I do think truth matters. And if I can't take Mongo and create a cloud hosting company from that code base, it's not open source.
Oh,
I mean,
no,
that's
no,
just
no, no, I agree. I agree. I didn't say I didn't agree, but there is this, like also because one of the reasons that did close it off is because, like if we're talking about like the spirit of open source, there's like, oh, anyone should be able to fork it and host their own version. And then there's
Sure.
like, hey, AWS is gonna is gonna take your entire thing and make
Well, but
their
how is that not in the spirit of open source? I mean, I would say
well,
that's
yeah,
literally the spirit of open
that,
source.
yeah, it is. It is. It just pisses people off basically, but
Well,
that
yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
mean
right. No, I
that
don't
doesn't
disagree.
mean
Oh, I mean, you're right. I mean, you get someone like a Microsoft or an Amazon or a Google or someone with all but unlimited pockets,
yeah, yeah.
right?
That's gonna
I
piss people off, but it's
I
still
get it. And like I said, I don't blame Mongo at all for what they did. I just don't want to change the definition of something, you know?
no. We're on the same page in that regard, but yeah, it's just yeah, it's a whole different conversation. Either way,
Yes.
like to go back to like the surrounding ecosystem because that's like we're also kind of siloed from the rest of the company in that respect because we're basically catching up on server releases because we have to like update and maintain all these
Mhm.
different libraries based on like new features and things like that. But what you said also about like, oh, they made a lot of these client libraries. Some of them weren't. Like for instance, we have libraries on the PHP team that were not ours, like the
Mm,
ODM that we use. So the Doctrine ODM, which is like the ORM, but the document version,
sure.
um, that one was not ours. That was started by a guy, and then years ago, obviously, I remember using it in like 2016 in my job, and when it was not Mongo's. But if you if you have that as your kind of ecosystem, then you're reliant on this. The onus for maintaining this thing is on this one maintainer who started years ago. They might get a different job, not even work with MongoDB anymore. They might have kids and family, whatever else. They might pivot away from software completely. So it's not smart to rely on like a single maintainer to offer a stable library to talk to your product for years and years and years. And
Well,
so,
especially with a language like PHP, right, which is so
yeah,
prevalent.
yeah.
Um, so this is interesting because obviously, and I want to make sure we don't go over time here, but the argument you hear often is that you've got this one guy supporting some and we've seen this happen in the past, some obscure library for whatever, but it's used by a million different products. I think curl is a good example.
Mm,
You'll see people come out and say we need to support curl because it's used blah 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 blah. But I really, while I do agree that it makes sense for companies to support open source, especially if they're using the product, I think that the expectation that they will is flawed because that isn't the spirit of open source. Um, and I think that we have to have a good relationship as companies with open source, but open source also needs to
mm,
realize that, well, you brought up Amazon. Amazon's a perfect example. And not to be bold, but if you're a dick of a maintainer, Amazon will just throw 50 engineers at it and it's just a line item for them,
yeah,
right? They don't
yeah,
have to support you,
yeah.
right? They don't need you. They already have the expertise. So you have to, there's definitely a relationship that has to be built for these types of support.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the value as well, because it's not a so I've only touched on we don't have much time obviously, but I've only touched on the value of like offering a stable usage experience for your developers, your users. But there's also the value in uh you know fostering goodwill and scoring points with popular framework maintainers, for instance. So if you're very if you're like very dedicated to open source because it's your full-time job, you get to actually contribute to frameworks and parts of the ecosystem that are very like hot in the moment that will create a lot of business value and things like that, and you're creating goodwill with the maintainers of these big frameworks, and so you get like a really close line of communication with them, and you also kind of get to position your product in these popular frameworks and libraries that heaps of people use. So there's like it's hard to measure, but you're going to get if you, for instance, in the docs have an example, in the docs for a given framework, you have an example that showcases that framework using your product, then automatically you're going to have heaps of people using your product that you otherwise wouldn't have. So
It's
there's
almost
these
like
relationships.
and unfortunately we are out of time here, but I think that what you're saying is it's almost like if you are responsible with your capitalism, you can make the world better. Oh my
What an
God.
interesting
What an
thought.
idea.
That's never occurred to me.
It never occurred to you. All right,
No,
folks, this has been another more than a refresh T3D sessions. Thank you, Pauline from MongoDB, for joining us, and it's been a great conversation.
thank you. Thanks for having me.